I'm delighted to introduce Rupert Moore, CEO of Aon Reinsurance Solutions UK. He's going to really set the scene of where we are as an industry when it comes to challenges around skills and talent. And he's joined by Poole, partner of Aon Human Capital Solutions, who'll start us thinking about some of the steps we can take on the road ahead to tackle these big and long-running challenges. We'll then go deeper into the topic of skills and reskilling in the first panel session at 11:25. But Rupert, if I could invite you up to the stage now, if you could put your video on. Hi, Rupert, good to see you. Hi, Anthony. Thank you both. Thank you both very much for joining us today. I will leave you guys to it and return at the end of the session, just in case we have any audience questions. But until then, over to you, Rupert.
Thank you very much, Anthony. It's a pleasure to be here. So I thought we'd start off just by setting the context of some of the challenges we see across the insurance industry. Some of these are global themes, some local to the UK. I think the first point to mention is how relevant insurance is to the global economy. So everything we're seeing, whether it's political or sort of economic, will have some form of impact on us. And it's an important part when we think about talent retention and attraction to make sure that we're presenting that very well to people. So that with that said, I think what we're seeing right now is a number of themes playing through. So there's the pandemic, which we're trying very hard to get away from, but that really, I think, accelerated a huge amount of change and moved us much faster around things like digital and agile working as good examples of trends that were accelerated by that. We've also seen and are in the middle of a supply and demand shock, where the supply side basically got pulled back as we went through pandemic, workforces downscaled, people working from home unable to make things. We've still got in China, for example, 50-odd ports shut. That has a huge amount of challenge for us. And then as people are sitting at home, or as people require better technology, for example, there's a demand shock there as well. And as governments pumped in billions and billions of dollars into the system, the natural result of that is inflation. So when we look at inflation today, whether inflation is running at sort of 5% or whether it's running at 10%, that has pretty material impact on us, both good and bad. And the last part is when we look into our crystal ball, we see some real recessionary challenge there. If we're having sort of say 3% growth, 5% to 10% inflation, that's one serious challenge that we can only really address through productivity, which comes back to people. But it also creates some opportunities for us as a business. I think it's also worth just thinking about the global risk landscape. Increasingly complex, increasingly more volatility, and how do we as the insurance industry help business and the economy at large move and transition. So just a few ones to throw out there. The impact of Russia and Ukraine, it'll certainly creating a lot of dynamics in the market that are challenging. So on the specialty lines, whether it's potential impact on aviation, marine, political violence and terror classes, you would expect those all to see some form of loss. They're very complicated losses and it'll take a while to develop, but they are certainly there. And then we've also got inflation, which is really a food and energy focused inflation. What does that mean for potential political unrest? And Ukraine is the breadbasket of Africa. There's some human challenge there. So what can the industry do around that? You also have the themes of climate change, which has really driven underperformance in the catastrophe line of business for a long time, which as context, catastrophe for reinsurance business is something like 80 to 90% of profit and about 30% of premium in the reinsurance P&C space. So it has dramatic impact on how reinsurers see the world. Overlay underinsurance or underdeclared values and inflation, and you get quite a challenging picture for people to navigate. You also have investor sentiment, partly around the ESG dynamics, but also from that cat view and an allergy to volatility. where investors don't believe that the insurance industry and reinsurance industry are getting paid enough for the volatility they're taking on. So understanding that, and then how we can support transition risk to a net zero path, and what new products and services we need to bring in there is tremendously important. You also have the growing and large already threat of cyber. It's a risk that moves incredibly quickly, and the technical understanding of that to really be able to guide our clients on what they should do about it is extremely challenging, and has only been accelerated by the pandemic as we've moved into a more digital world. And the last sort of complexity, I'd say, come from the intangible assets. Something like 85% of the value of the S&P is in intangibles. Our industry is almost exclusively focused on physical. So how do we find a way to go after that IP opportunity and to remove volatility from large companies' supply chains, etc., through intellectual property insurance? So huge amounts going on there. And really the takeaway from all of that is the more volatile, the more complex, the more we need to invest in understanding those dynamics and helping customers make better decisions. That's very much what we're trying to do as Aon across the piece. But it's a real challenge for us all, and it directly affects the talent pool that we need to be attracting into the industry. Alongside that, how do we explain that to customers? How do we get that message out there? So the customer experience is very important. Reducing frictional costs of the industry through better technology. And I think also one thing to remember as an insurance company, events tend to correlate in the tail. So when bad stuff happens, it really impacts earnings and capital. And we've learned that through the pandemic, we've learned that through various cyber losses, large-scale cat. And when we overlay all of that background against what is an extremely competitive hiring market and talent market, it's quite a complex situation that we all need to grapple with. I think what is clear, though, is against that sort of complex set of challenges, continually investing in the talent pool that we have in the industry, bringing more people into the business and developing them quickly is absolutely critical for all our success. And I think, Anthony, there's some good research that your group have done around putting some quantification around that. So really there's a sort of perfect storm of increasing challenge. And then on the talent landscape, we've got generally an aging population within the insurance world. I think our research suggests there's somewhere between 25 and 40% of the workforce is retiring over the next 3 to 5 years. 30% of roles potentially disrupted by technology. We've got the lowest unemployment rate since 1974, so longer than the vast majority, and certainly longer than my career, longer than my life, in fact, at 3.8%. And I think within the UK, the Times were saying that there's 1.1 million excess jobs that we need to fill. And then the financial services in generally are not as attractive to millennial talent as they used to be. And certainly anecdotally, when we talk to graduate hires, it's less about how much they can earn, which is candidly, when I was a graduate, that was the question everyone asked. And it's more about what's your ESG posture, what are the values of your company, and what does a longer term career path look like, and then it's money. So we've got some complex challenges there to work through. And I guess the other challenge, I think, and perhaps this is a medium long term, but a fundamental shift in work culture has been observed as we've gone through the pandemic. 2 years of people sitting at home has changed the work-life balance dynamic, not necessarily reduced how hard people work, but it's changed perceptions and work styles. And how we manage an in-office, out-of-office dynamic is a real challenge for all of us. So that is a context, and I think some of those themes will combine into what Aon called the Great Convergence. And as not an HR professional, I thought I'd sort of rely on Anthony Poole to to help us understand what those are. So Anthony, could you give us an overview, please?
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Rupert. And so many of the things you talked about, the challenges that we're seeing, the dynamics that are pressing us as organisations, are different strands that we've really tried together when we thought about how we can support our clients. In our Human Capital Solutions business, we're very much focused on helping organisations make better decisions around people risk and their people risks. And in order to do that, we really need to better understand the challenge, the problem. We know that people risk is one of the top 1, 2, or 3 risks amongst organisations when we look at Aon's Global Risk Management Survey. We've done throughout the pandemic over the last 2 years, 2.5 years, a continual set of pulse studies amongst organisations across sectors, but obviously focusing in this discussion a little bit more specifically in financial services. And we know that the loss of key talent, the retention of key skills is fundamental to the HR agenda. It's right near the top, if not at the top, of what we're trying to mitigate and trying to deal with. And to help our clients think through that, one of the things we hear lots of talk around a great resignation, but not everyone is experiencing huge resignation troubles. There's a lot of that around, but it's not necessarily everyone. We know there's challenges around finding people and talent, and we know there's huge pressure around the costs in terms of compensation and the uplift that's driving that. But what we've tried to do is unpick that a little bit and come back to a set of issues that we think are driving this, to help our clients then think about what are the issues that are most keen to us and how can we think about mitigating those. And that's when we come to our rhetoric around what we call the Great Convergence. And it quite simply is that it's all industries are affected in similar ways, well, maybe with differing outcomes, because of the convergence of certain topics. And this Great Convergence piece we talk about, number 1 on the list, unsurprisingly, on a day like today, as we talk about insurance skills, is skills convergence. More and more organizations are going after the same kind of skills. And you would readily recognize when we talk about technical skills around IT, around data scientists, increasingly things like compliance, but they're the technical skills. There's a bigger challenge out there in terms of the softer skills around curiosity, learnability, adaptiveness that we need in the organization to be able to recognize and adapt to the changes that are coming about for our business. Added to that, we see increasing digital convergence, industries coming closer together and competing for the same types of talent and the same types of business. That challenges our margins, that puts pressure on our economics, and also opens us up to a much broader definition of competitors. As Rupert said, financial services probably doesn't have the same cachet that it did 20 years ago or 30 years ago, and that presents a unique challenge that we need to be very thoughtful about as employers. Probably the biggest one in our convergence conversation is about social and work-life convergence. That has been a change for all of us, unquestionably, in the last few years. And that has caused people to challenge their own ideals around, what do I want from my employer? I've heard organizations talk to me about the social contract has changed. Do I want to be in the office? Do I want to be working for an organization that espouses different virtues? When we think about ESG, they are real winning factors when we think about differentiation for employers in a marketplace, where we would also talk about further convergence from a macroeconomic perspective. Everybody is squeezed for talent. Rupert talks about the number of vacancies that are out there at the moment. The people who are looking for employment are the ones with the choice. It used to be employers were the ones with choice. So how do we as employers separate ourselves out and identify us as an employer of choice to that potential talent? And the final piece is around geopolitical convergence. The events that are happening in the world are very much affecting us in direct kind of ways around inflation and cost of living, but they're affecting us from a mental perspective, from a happiness perspective, and that is a challenge to employers as we think about how we establish a motivated workforce. So on that, Rupert, I'll pass back to you with some more context.
Thanks, Anthony. So I guess we're left with sort of 2 key questions. How do we secure and sustain talent in the organization to get a thriving workforce? And how do we drive performance and be able to compete for talent beyond just pay? So it's really around the holistic offering. And what does that really mean? And for me and Aon Re UK's business, we've been through a bit of a change where we're aligning all of this into how we set up our business. So we've restructured our business recently to bring a much stronger focus around clients. Historically, the London market's been really strong on product and traded exceptionally well, and that is its unique strength. But how do we bring that client focus in to complement that product focus, and have more of a holistic engagement there where we can bring all of Aon's capabilities to our customers. We then align into different segments. So it could be a Lloyd segment, it could be UK regional, it could be global, or an MGA, for example, so that we're talking to clients around similar challenges that they face. So what we say resonates. It's also, this gives us more diverse roles, and we're looking for more broad skill sets so that we can solve the challenges we've got in front of us. And that also allows us to give more career paths to people. So you're not stuck in one particular line of business. You can move easily between a line of business into a client role, into a technical role, etc. So we hope that that gives us more marketability and more longevity, so people don't need to look outside the organization to the same extent for that next career move. It also gives us an ability to tap into new skill sets, we can fish in a different pool for talent. So recent examples, we've been hiring equity analysts, for example, to join the dots between the reinsurance product and what that means for shareholder valuations. As also similarly as we build analytics, that gives us broader and deeper pools, both in the UK and frankly globally, that we can explore. The other area that we're really focused on is graduate talent. I think when I first joined Aon as a graduate 22 years ago, I think there were 14 of us. We're now hiring just within, and that was across all of Aon UK, just within Reinsurance Solutions, we're now hiring 36 graduates and 20 school leavers. So it's a much more scaled investment, and that's really around some of the succession challenges we have, but also around the skills and building in clear views of the future of what we need to do. Other areas that we're investing in is around digital platforms. So how can we trade electronically, whether it's our core treaty or facultative product? How can we remove some of the frictional costs that are associated, and how can we get better data to give more real-time insights to customers? And lastly, around flexible approach to work. Hugely important to people, particularly as you're looking to bring people back into the workforce who have maybe been off on maternity or have other calls in their life that they need to balance. So us as an employer to be able to offer that is tremendously valuable to people. But Anthony, where does the industry go from here? I mean, that's very much sort of a personal journey for Aon.
Yeah, and obviously you and I, Rupert, both like to think Aon is best in class when we think about those things. And it's certainly an area where we spend an awful lot of time with clients, helping them to think through what does that look like? What should we be doing? What are some of the actions we can take? And it truly is a challenge in terms of where do you start? And I'm just going to give you 5 pieces of thoughts, if you like, in terms of how we'd address that question and what it means. So number one, where do you start? One, that is to start with what you have, thinking about the people that we have and trying to establish and understand the skills that we have across that group. What's absolutely clear in financial services is people are at the center of our business, and no financial services organization I've yet met with would suggest that they haven't been successful in some way, shape or form. That means we have a strong set of people to begin with. Do we recognize that? Do we understand that? We're working with some organizations to start to build skills databases around the roles and the people that they have, because that's the start point. Developing a language around skills and recognizing what we have. The second is what you talked about, Rupert, around career pathing and understanding the importance of having an internal market for talent, especially as a larger organization, but it can be done in small firms as well. We can create retention through opportunity internally, and so many organizations are struggling with that opportunity or with that retention piece. We talk, obviously, culturally, how compelling that is when we talk about an employee value proposition. At our organization, there's the opportunity to move around, to experience new things, and we know that new generations coming into the workforce, that's exactly what they want. They want more variation in their careers. They're not going to be as one-track focused. The third thing is we've got to recognize that we are, to our convergence conversation, benchmarking against a broader set of organizations. It's not just the insurance sector anymore. We've got to take talent from tech. We're competing with retail as well. There's so many other sectors, not just financial services, not outlining that at all, because that's a very important one for us as well. but we've got to recognise the breadth of competition. More focus around diversity, equity and inclusion. It really is a solution to some of this stuff, because that's about tapping into potential talent that maybe we haven't looked at closely enough in the past. And you could argue that the pandemic and the flexibility we now have gives us more opportunity for people, because if you take an insurance market, we don't just need people in London, in the UK. We can look all across the piece, and we've got much more opportunity out there for talent. And then the final one is probably the most difficult one in my mind, and I've been a rewards consultant for many years, is making sure that reward is supportive of that process. We've got to support people through that journey. That probably does mean being a little bit more, or a little bit less individualistic about pay, and thinking more from a scorecard perspective, not just judging outcomes. But we've got to make sure that we manage people through that process and give them the time commitment they need to make the changes that we're asking them to make. I think are probably the 5.
Thank you. So I guess just a sort of a few closing comments, really. It's very clearly an uncertain world. There's some huge economic risk, and there's some challenges. Inflation, for example, we haven't seen in 40 years. So a lot of the knowledge that we have in the industry that has dealt with that last time was very formative in their careers, if they are still with us and working. But we don't have that baseline to fall back on of recent experience. So there's a lot of challenges that are complex to solve. And that's really the sort of context that I think we'd ask you to think through and set up for the future sessions that you're going to work through, and keep the real business issues front of mind when you're thinking about talent. But with that, Anthony, to pass back to you.
Thanks, guys. That was brilliant. I think you've really set the scene there. I mean, you've outlined just the scale of the challenge and how complex it is, but also some really good practical steps forward as well, which hopefully are things that we can explore in the coming sessions. I'm conscious we've only got less than 2 minutes to go in this session before we switch over. So I'll just put one question out there. I think at the start you mentioned the link between good talent management and financial performance, or performance as a company. Can you just kind of explain how that relates in reality? What the kind of drivers of performance are when it comes to talent?
So, I mean, I think from my perspective, that I'll pass over to Anthony, I think it's really around, we've got all these complex issues. How do we solve for them? And performance is ultimately, how do we solve for them in a collaborative way with a customer? So that's what we're striving for. But from a sort of more strategic HR perspective, Anthony.
I think to be honest, a lot of that comes down to the fundamentals of really engagement and people being really switched on to their compelling work environment. Right? If they see the organization working for them, they work for the organization, and we know that productivity can be significantly impacted by those kinds of levels of engagement. And people understanding that the organization is genuinely committed to their career and their development, it really does give people that extra push and can make a tremendous difference when it comes to business performance outcomes. Brilliant.
Well, your timing is impeccable, guys. I appreciate that. We're just coming up out of time. So thank you again to Rupert and Anthony. That was a fantastic introduction.